Welcome back to the First Mile podcast with me, Dom Birch. This is the podcast where we explore the very beginning of the digital journey, where every click, every conversation, every interaction first takes shape. Now, retail media networks have gone from a nice to have to a board level priority in just a few years, driven by margin pressure, privacy shifts, and a fundamental change in how consumers shop and how they consume media. And today's guest has had a front row seat to that transformation. Neerav Vyas is helping build and scale commerce and retail media capabilities inside some of the world's most complex organizations, from hyperscalers to retailers, and now at Capgemini works with brands and retailers navigating what comes next. Now, a year ago, Neerav was already talking about retail media entering its second generation, moving beyond outsourced free money models towards own platforms, composable architectures, and real collaboration between retailers and brands, all under growing privacy and identity constraints. So ahead of NRF and a session that he'll be hosting there in a few weeks, we wanted to step back and explore what it really takes to turn retail media ambition into operational reality, from data foundations and identity to teams, technology, and time to value. All right, let's dive in. Neerav, thank you so much for coming on to the First Mile podcast.
Dom, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, no, my pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. Right, let's get stuck into it, right? A year ago, you described retail media, or retail and commerce media, let's get it right, as entering a second generation, moving away from outsourced managed service models towards something far more strategic and owned. So looking back now, what's changed most and what surprised you?
I believe the number of individuals that are starting to rethink that transformation journey has accelerated tremendously in the last 12 months. I think, a year ago when we were having these conversations, I think a lot of folks were still not quite understanding why. But now more and more organizations are feeling that pressure to say the category is growing at a 20-30% CAGR. Why are we not doing it? The category has a 70% margin. Why are we sub 50%? Why are we stagnating? Right. And I think the second element is that, that first generation retail media, a lot of folks were coming in and viewing it as a nice to have high revenue stream. And now when we think about the growth in retail, particularly happening in e-commerce, but the fact that e-commerce is a bit of a loss leader, the ability to leverage a high revenue margin stream to subsidize your e-commerce journey, or maybe offset some of the inflationary pressures that consumers are facing and provide kind of that additional value to your consumers or members, right? I think it's becoming more of a strategic imperative, right? And so that's the major shift, in my opinion.
And that margin thing's interesting, right? Because it's gone from being margin only. Let's put it this way, right? The margin only materializes if retailers actually build the right foundations, right? So in your view, what's the biggest misconception leaders still have about that retail media growth that you're alluding to? Because it's the holy grail, right? I remember 15 years ago back at Asda, we were like, we need to get into this because our grocery home shopping site is losing money. Let's sell media to prop it up, right? But the foundations were pretty poor back then.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of think about it as three major building blocks, right? We've got the inventory, the ad units themselves, both on and off site, right? The individuals, right? So the household and the contextual understanding of the journey around that individual and their household and where they're at. And then most importantly, the insights itself, right? I think too often the media networks are not understanding that I need to truly link the insights and the outcomes for my suppliers, right? To be able to understand the value in it. I think too often many retailers sometimes think of it as a version of trade promotion 2.0. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think even in a modern world of TPM 2.0, that connection to ROAS, that connection to the return on overall investment becomes important. And if we don't have a linkage across all three of these things, right, then you don't have the right foundations to show value, and you're going to be viewed as more of a commodity player rather than a differentiator. And that has an implication on the willingness to pay higher CPMs, the willingness to invest in larger upfront deals or JBP agreements right with you.
I'm so glad you describe it that way. I remember being inside the retailer and running the retail media network and going, we have to remember, like, our primary focus as a grocery retailer is to sell our customers groceries at great value, be available, have what they want on their list. And the retail media is assisting them in that journey. It's prompting them to buy things that they probably want, but they didn't realize you sell, or to signify a promotion that's coming. As soon as you start behaving like you're just a media player, disconnected from the purpose of that foundation in the first place, you can really divert off course quickly, can't you?
Absolutely. And I think there's an interesting point that you're making too, right? Which is, retailers didn't grow up in a media landscape, right? They didn't grow up in a typical technology landscape, right? Asda, Walmart probably being the exceptions to that rule, right? And so understanding that media expertise, understanding the technology expertise, but also linking that back into the experience piece, I think it's a major shift also from 12 months ago. And what I mean by that is, in some ways, if you do retail media right, you're solving for the business, right? And some of the business challenges that you have. But if you really want to differentiate yourself, you almost need to think through and say, how do I solve for the consumer and the experience itself? How do I potentially use retail media to drive better experiences, a better value proposition for my members? And if I do that, I'm truly kind of bringing all three of these pieces together.
Now, you've said previously, not every retailer should try to be the Amazon or the Walmart, right? And so how should leaders be thinking about which retail model is right for them before they start investing in the technology?
Yeah, I think the aspirations for your retail media network are really important. Look, if you're going to be in a $102 million range, you're using this to augment trade promotions, you're going to have a different set of objectives and goals that you're going to go through. And that's not a bad thing, right? But if that's your view, then you've got to go to your board and have a conversation and say, we're probably going to be sub 50% margin, right? We're going to be in this $102 million range, and we're going to basically stay there. And that's it, right? And that's a good thing. It's $200 million I probably wouldn't have had. And at a 10 to 30% margin, right? That's still, 10 to 30 million or 10 to 60 million, right? That's in your pockets. That's going to help drive and fund some initiatives. I think as folks look to drive differentiation, start to get into that, 500 million, billion plus range, you have to start thinking about it a bit differently. And it's interesting because we get asked a lot on what does good and great begin to look like. And the Walmart, Amazon model of building or acquiring a streaming company or a TV company is one mechanism, and there's an M&A component associated to that. But I think a lot more retailers are going to use partnership and collaboration models to go through, right? I think about partnering with the streaming platforms, the Disneys, the NBCs, and the Peacocks of the world, and providing really unique measurement and audience capabilities that can be really valuable and differentiating and almost simulate full funnel analytics for your CPG partners, right? And provide a lot of valuable insights, because then I can track that top of funnel journey all the way through mid and bottom funnel. And I do that through partnership, right? Recognizing that, again, I'm not going to be a media company, but I do definitely need to partner with these media partners. And on the same point, right, it provides a ton of value to the Disneys, the NBCs of the world, because you're looking at ad spend and the ad dollars, improving the ability to do targeting, and also providing those very same brands that are advertising with them, right, that connection back into that transaction, right, that they've typically have been disintermediated from.
I mean, consistently we'll come back, won't we, to data and analytics being at the core of this, right? So as cookies disappear and privacy expectations are clearly on the rise, right? Some of that driven by legislation around the world. Is identity now like the hardest and most underappreciated part of building a sustainable retail media network?
Yes and no. I think it's one of the most important and critical, and I think many organizations would view it as being very difficult, right? But we've worked with the team at MetaRouter with a number of large clients, and the ability to actually take a problem that was very, very difficult and solve it and make it make it an order of magnitude easier, I think is really important, right? And I was Apple's guinea pig for ADT deprecation 3 years before ATT was announced writ large, and being able to leverage that technology, right, to orchestrate experiences in a privacy compliant manner, to stitch journeys together, and to have full ownership of that data was invaluable for me at that juncture. And I think that becomes the playbook for customers moving forward, which is there's certain solutions that are undifferentiated heavy lifting for the organization, but drive a tremendous amount of power. A lot of the identity spine is a key to that. So let's accelerate the ability to understand the consumer, understand their journeys, and orchestrate them in a privacy compliant manner, while also augmenting and accelerating our journey and our goal for driving personalization and hyper-contextualization. So absolutely think that it's critical, right? But now that we've got a bit more of a playbook, right, to not have to have the full burden of solving the problem ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's key, isn't it? I mean, it's a little bit like you were saying earlier about that collaboration point. There are some really, really smart folks who've already figured out some of this stuff. How do you do it so you're compliant, whether it's GDPR over here in the UK or other regulators? How do you do that match? How do you find out more about your customer using the signals that are coming in, but also then to organize that data in such a way that everything else that comes next is going to be higher quality? So regardless of other tech stacks you've got, I mean, it's the old adage, right? Good in, better out, right?
Yes. Absolutely, right. If we clean up the data collection, fidelity, and validation early on, right, then it solves a lot of the problems downstream in terms of trust in the data, trust in the audience, but also to your supplier partners or advertiser partners from our commerce media network perspective, it's going to give them a lot more faith and fidelity in the uniqueness of the audience or the uniqueness of the contextualization of the journey that you're looking for. I think there's one added benefit as well, right, is in that ability to stitch that journey between unknown to known really well. We also give our experienced teams a number of more tactics associated with that, right? We don't want to force people to log in to do an e-commerce transaction if they're going to be browsing, right? And so email to web as a tactic, right, is quite common. And my ability to link that email transaction to the web without forcing someone to authenticate, but still unknowing who they are, right, in a privacy compliant manner, right? I think that's really, really valuable because it helps to enable frictionless experiences while providing value to the consumer.
And that's what the consumer wants, right? I mean, at the end of the day, when I flip from my phone to my tablet to my laptop to back to my phone later in the day, I want you as the retailer to know it's me because I'm like halfway through doing something. It's not your fault. I got distracted by work or Instagram or the wife coming home and saying, where's the tea? You know, so the sort of, I used to call it back in Azure days, like, would I do it? Does it pass the would I do it test? And then also, are you making it easier for me? And that's what companies are striving for, right? Taking away those barriers, making it more seamless, making it easier for the consumer.
Absolutely. I also think about it from the perspective of, many organizations are like worried that consumers are not going to give them consent, right, to kind of utilize their data. But think about it from the perspective of logging into your Amazon homepage, right, in an authenticated state versus an unauthenticated state, or logging into your Netflix profile, right, in the profile where you've had established interactions versus go create a new Netflix profile. The minute that you create a new Netflix profile, it's a terrible experience, right? It's very generic, it's very bland, it doesn't know you, and it takes some time for that to come in versus a profile where you've already been established. There's a value in the recommendations and the personalization coming in. So I have no problems and qualms with being authenticated in within my Amazon profile, within my Netflix profile, because the experience that's being engendered, right, drives a ton of value. So I absolutely think the retailers need to understand that not only in terms of being in the midst of a transaction, but if we're providing that personalization, that recommendation, there's a ton of value. And I think sometimes they think that the advertising gets in the way of that. But if you're actually bringing a product to my mindset that I didn't know I was looking for, but I can't live without, I drive a serendipitous recommendation, you're providing a tremendous amount of value to me, as well as to the advertiser or supplier that you're working for.
100%. You're taking it off that to-do list that's in the back of their head. They didn't realize it was there, and you've just lifted a load, right? It's gone, and they move on. You mentioned earlier about data collaboration and how that between retailers and brands is finally becoming viable, technically and commercially. What's changed in the last few years to make that more possible now?
I think the rise of kind of collaboration technologies, right, like clean rooms and those collaboration spaces have made it more open for organizations to be part of that and to facilitate that. And I think it's just become a bit more of a necessary state, right? Because, before we knew all the problems with third-party cookies. We knew the fidelity of the ecosystem wasn't great. If anything, it was probably quite poor, right? But it was easy, so we just lived with it, right? Now that that option has gotten and deprecated significantly, right, the easy option isn't as viable or as attractive anymore, and so it's forcing us to kind of think through those first party relationships. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, the overall privacy landscape having become more constrained and more regulated, I think it's forcing folks to say, hey, I'm not going to just throw flat files over the shelf, right? But there's a ton of value in there, and I think that the evolution of the collaboration framework, collaboration landscape, and the collaboration experience, right? And the mental models that are now sitting within organizations provides a ton of value for commerce media because yes, your suppliers are going to be your low-hanging fruit, right, to work with, but that growth on the non-endemic side of the house is tremendously valuable. That's exponentially where we at Amazon saw growth. Imagine that you, with the team at Asda, saw something very similar. And so if we build these systems and these experiences right, there's a ton of value beyond just my supplier ecosystem that I can be providing value to, but also helping to bolster, right, the overall business model for my media network.
Now, one thing that doesn't often get talked about enough, I guess, is people and structure. So from what you're seeing, how do retail media teams need to be organized differently going forward and compared to traditional marketing or e-commerce teams?
The biggest challenge that I see within the organizational structures is the lack of dependency or interaction and alignment with your different teams, particularly your e-commerce teams and your in-store teams, right? So I don't think it's new news to anybody that, on-site ad inventory in my e-commerce experience, my mobile app experience, drives significantly higher margin, right? 3 to 4 times higher margin than off-site does. But very few organizations really delve into on-site well, right? And expand their on-site programs. They throw it over to a managed service provider. They've got one static banner, very buried, very deep within it, but not any type of a truly personalized experience on like sponsored listings like Amazon has or Walmart has, right? And because you need a lot of interaction and coordination with my e-com team. And then, there aren't a lot of folks that are doing that in-store on like cooler screens or digital out of home within the store itself, right? Because again, that requires coordination with my physical team, my merchandising teams, et cetera. But there's a ton of value there. So I'd say from an organizational perspective, that alignment across those teams, I think is absolutely critical. And for those e-commerce teams or those in-store teams, I think they increasingly need to think about how do you integrate the ad inventory in a way that represents the brand, but also helps to elevate the overall experience. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that and do that well, but it's generally not like the initial starting point, right, that those teams are coming at it.
And from your perspective at Capgemini, where do partners add the most value today? Like not just in implementation, but in helping retailers evolve their retail media capabilities over time?
I think, there's a couple key areas, right, which is, 5 to 7 years ago, right, the Amazon model, the Walmart model was very much everyone has to go build everything from scratch, right? Or go buy, an ad serving technology like, we did with Seismic, right? But now the technology landscape has evolved so much that to your point early on, composable solutions are incredibly viable, right? And they're easier to implement. So you're not talking about a 12 to 18 month implementation period. You're talking about weeks and months, right? To put a core technology into place and have it showcase tremendous value. So I view that as the key element of the partner ecosystem, which is, right, it's not build versus buy. It's how much do we build? How much do we buy? How much do we partner? And we've got a lot more flexible options associated with that. And I think composable architectures make it a lot easier to provide value. And that's where I think the partner ecosystem has been so helpful in kind of providing those suite of composable solutions, right, that make it easier for us to provide value faster.
We've only done like 20 minutes and we've covered so much ground, right? But I want to look ahead a little bit, right? So we're coming into
Certainly.
Christmas is coming, and then suddenly it'll be the new year, and then suddenly everyone's going to be in Vegas, and then they're going to be in New York, right? So looking ahead to the session that you're hosting at NRF in a few weeks' time. Now you're going to have some leaders who are deep in this space. What's the one conversation you think the industry still isn't having but needs to?
I think evolving their technology and their transformation suite to drive those better experiences and how identity is core to that and how doing that in a privacy compliant manner and orchestrating it, I think that's critical. It's just the number of organizations that are still throwing too much of their solution over to kind of traditional partners within the ecosystem, I think is a huge challenge. And so I think of some of the conversation that I hope Nikhil will be having right around NRF is incredibly valuable because it's showcasing a blueprint for evolution on like how Walmart, Asda, and Amazon did this, right? And how folks can accelerate their own transformations and their own journeys, right? And the fact that, again, it doesn't need to be a laborious exercise. So to me, I mean, I'm always ecstatic to speak with Nikhil and hear his words of wisdom and his experiences. But I think that's the most important for me because I think that starts to help shepherd folks on their transformations and their journeys quickly.
Now, before Capgemini, you were on the other side of the table, right? So you were the customer. You were making real buying decisions with real constraints. And, you know, to be fair, you were an early adopter of MetaRouter. So looking back now, what problem were you trying to solve at the time? And what mattered most in that decision that you made?
Yeah. So for a little bit of context, about 4.5, 5 years ago, Apple decided to do ATT deprecation with the children's category first. And I was part of a company called Homer Learning. We were basically the Uber of the children's category. We were the largest spender by far for both Apple and for Google. And we basically saw the deprecation first-party identifiers as a critical blocker to being able to drive growth-oriented marketing for us, right? And we were a startup thinking about raising our Series C just as this announcement came in. And so for us, not finding a solution to be able to orchestrate identity to match that attribution back into our acquisition funnel basically would have prevented our ability to raise money, right? The company would have folded. And so part of that was solving that. And I worked with the Apple team with the who's who in the ecosystem to replace our stack in a privacy compliant manner. And the benefit that we saw with MetaRouter was not only did you meet the standards and exceed the standards for privacy that Apple set, which is a very, very high bar to begin with, right? But being able to orchestrate and integrate you into our mobile apps and our websites very, very quickly. We did in a matter of weeks and basically rebuilt our data platform around you guys. And literally, I think it was about 5.5 weeks, and most of that was contracting, right? Was immensely valuable. But then the fidelity and the strength of the solution, again, despite the fact that we were a mobile app company, we were building mobile apps for Lego, Sesame, and Mattel, right? We had billions of events coming in through day, tens of millions of consumers that were interacting in the app, and particularly during COVID when parents were looking for a solution for education for their kids when they were out of school. So the ability for you guys to provide a solution that was quick, that met Apple standards, right? And could meet the demands, right, of the volume that we were seeing and scale with us, right? Especially at those surge peak moments we had during COVID, that was invaluable.
Just based on the conversation we've had, like this event at NRF is going to be like a real, I'm going to say humdinger. I don't know if that translates across the pond, right? But it's going to be a good one. What are you looking forward to about that? And why should people come along, tune in and check it out?
I think listening to you and hearing from industry leaders who have both been in the shoes, right, building these solutions, building these media networks across a variety of capacities, have also worked and partner with a lot of both retailers, but also travel and hospitality companies, like media companies, like the NBCs of the world. That provides a lot of value because you understand that there's a lot of synergies in the experiences that folks have done, but also that the transformation that's happened in the landscape provides a lot of answers so that you don't have an infinite set of permutations that you need to go through. There's a few tried and trusted ways to make these things work. And they do have trade-offs in terms of like how you want to work, what responsibilities you want to take on. But I think I'm hoping that folks will find that conversation to be tremendously valuable to say, okay, there's a 2 or 3 playbooks in here, and I can easily begin to customize and tailor them to meet my needs, right? And then take that to have a strategic conversation with senior leadership of my organization with the confidence to know that it can be executed well, right? Because I'm not reinventing the wheel here.
Perfect. Listen, Neerav, we could chat all afternoon, all morning for you, but thank you so much for coming on to the First Mile podcast.
Dom, it was a pleasure. Happy holidays, and look forward to meeting everyone at NRF.
So there we go. What really stands out in that for me is that retail media works when it's not because of a single platform or tactic, but it's because the foundations are right. The data is intentional, identity is handled with care, teams are set up to learn and adapt, and value shows up early enough to sustain that momentum. I also love the perspective that Neerav brings when he's having been on both sides, right? The builder, the buyer, and now somebody who's helping organizations scale this responsibility. It's a reminder that the hardest problems in retail media often aren't technical in isolation. They're about decisions, trade-offs, and operating models. And they're going to be talking a lot about this when they come to the stage at NRF in a few weeks. And I know this conversation will give you a useful lens before they get there. But for the time being, thank you for joining us on the First Mile podcast. And to our listeners, if you found this useful, make sure you subscribe and join us next time as we'll continue exploring the very start of the digital data journey, where every interaction begins and where the biggest decisions often get made.